So this is a rubber and plaster mold of a swamp scene. That was kind of hard to see. Probably can't see it at all. Anyway, this was the first bronze we poured for another artist other than my wife. And that was like 7 years ago. I still have the mold. And the guy who's, geez, he must be in his 80s. He just called me the other day. He wants another one. So I'm going to pour a bronze. I haven't done any bronze work in quite a few weeks, and you can tell because the foundry is totally out of control. So before we get started, and I'll document it, before we get started, I'm going to spend a couple hours and do some cleanup here. This is, man, I'm such a pig. So we did a pretty good cleanup yesterday, even hosed the floor down, which makes it pretty nice. So I'm currently just turned on the fire. I'm going to melt some wax. This is my processed wax. This is unprocessed wax. And I'm going to get in here and clean the wax room. Hopefully by the time I got the wax room clean, this will be melted and we can make a wax cast. Air conditioner's on, it runs all summer long. Otherwise, all this wax will be melted into a big solid blob. So we've got a clean wax room ready to work in here. And now that I can concentrate on the wax, I'll take it out of the double boiler and just put it right on the fire and keep stirring it so I know it won't burn. Worked on this cast about 6 months ago, and I took a bunch of video, and I wasn't going to post it because these casting videos are pretty unpopular with my viewers, and I've done a bunch of them. But I read in the paper a few weeks back that Jim had died, so I thought, well, let me go ahead and do this. In his memory, he was a typical starving artist, a good artist. He had a passion for it, but he just never had the clientele so where he could be a full-time artist. Instead, he hung doors for a living, like not Home Depot doors, but like custom doors, super heavy, super big doors. And he was a frail little old man. I don't know how he did it, but he did it for 25 years. So now the rubber part of this mold is exactly the same rubber as Debbie uses. The mother mold is different because this piece is sort of small. It's just got a big blob of plaster of Paris on the back to hold the rubber up, and it works okay for this one. And it's real cheap and it's simple. Debbie's pieces are so big that you couldn't make the plaster where it wouldn't break when you're handling it, and if you did, it'd be 300 or 400 pounds a piece. So we use a more elaborate mother mold system with the plaster paste and the wood frame. Anyway, here's the mold. The piece is really thin. It's kind of hard to get the wax spread out uniformly so that when when it gets hard, the back will be smooth. But I did the best I can and went after the fact with a torch and kind of torched it down, and it came out okay. Here I'm giving the back a little more love, trying to knock down some of the bumps, because when this is against the wall, you don't want it all lumpy on the back. I'm using ruining a good paint scraper with some heat, and but it works. It flattens out the wax. This is a tough mold in one aspect, is it doesn't have an edge. It just feathers out into zero, which obviously is not going to work. But I think I have enough wax built up so that when I take it out, when it cools and take it out and flip it over, I think I have enough wax to trim and have a decent amount of wax on the edge without just making the whole thing too dang heavy. I'm gonna cool it down with some water, and we're gonna pull it out of there pretty soon. It's been a long time since I messed with plaster molds or plaster mother molds, and I forgot. The wax will stick to the plaster unless you soak it in water first. So I got a little mess on my hands. I gotta take a sharp object and run around the perimeter and try to pry the wax loose from the plaster without distorting the sculpture. And I did that with a terrible camera angle, so you can't really see what I was doing, but I was just prying it loose. And rubber will not stick to the wax, or the wax will not stick to the rubber. So this came off pretty easy. You just had to be careful because it was so freaking thin. It's a thin little piece of art. I'm not sure, but I think originally this was a wood carving that he made a mold of, because I think he did a lot of wood carving. I don't have any way to know now, but I believe this was originally a wood carving, which makes it a little more incredible. So the top half of this scene is the positive, or the true view, and the bottom half is what you would see reflective off the water. All right, it looks pretty good. A couple of little bug holes. This bottom half is like perfect. So I can trim it around the trees, and it'll actually have holes in the middle. And I wanted to do that before it got too cold. And if I need it thicker, I can put it back in the mold and put a little bit more wax on it. So I brought it into the wax room where I have better lighting, and I cut out all the backgrounds that get cut out. And what I need to do now is fill all these little bug holes. See that little bitty hole right there? And there's one there. Because if I don't fill them, then the bronze will have a hole in it, and I'll have to weld it and then grind it. If I fill it, even if it's oversized, even if it's a drop and it's sticking up, then when I cast the bronze, I'll have a little bump and those knock off so easy. So I'm gonna go with the soldering gun and melt little drops of wax, probably from these little scraps, and try to fill up every hole I see. I'm sure I'll miss some, but I'll try to get as many as I can. And then I'm gonna cut it in half somewhere because it's too big for me to handle in a ceramic shell mold. We did this when I poured it for him the first time. We cut it in half and then welded it together after the fact. We're gonna do that again. I think I have all the little holes filled with drops of wax, and I also took the soldering iron and softened the inside edges of all these cutouts, because it's a lot easier to do now than with the grinder. The exterior, that's easy because I can put the flat disc on it, but all those little holes, kind of smooth them out. And now I need to cut it in half. It's kind of my call on where to cut it, basically roughly in half. I would rather cut it where there's this vertical texture, because that's easier to reproduce than this texture. So maybe through here. I'm gonna have to get a tape and make sure I'm halfway in the middle so I can get it in my ceramic shell bucket when I'm done. Okay, it's cut in half. I went and measured my ceramic shell bucket and it'll fit. And I'm getting dreadfully low on sprues. I have these two risers. I think I'll have enough for these two, but I got some more stuff to pour, so I need to order some more wax on Monday. First half treed up. I'm not crazy about using all these little bitty sprues at the top, but I'm running out of the square stuff. I'm running out of sprues, period. So I'm kind of making do. So I'm going to show you how I did that on the second one. And it's hard because I'm using my phone and I usually have wax all over my hands, but we're going to do the best we can to get some details here. Okay, so I'm going to put a little piece of wax. Come on, man. Put a piece of wax here. Here. In the hot plate is a wax called sticky wax, and it is formulated just for this. It sets real fast and it sticks better than just plain old wax. And also the wax sticks better to warm surfaces, so you saw past the propane torch across this red sprue. This is real soft wax, this red wax, so it's real bendable. It's kind of nice to work with. Now, how many do you need and where do you need them? That's the $1 million question. For me, it's kind of guesswork. I know what I've done in the past and what works for the most part, and that's kind of what I go by. I probably tend to put more than I need because cutting off excess bronze is easier than putting bronze in that didn't flow. The bronze chills rapidly. It'll only flow for so long before it freezes. So you want to get the bronze into position as quickly as you can, and this soldering gun is a piece of junk and I threw it away.
All the connections need to be nice and rounded for several reasons. One, you want them as strong as possible so the wax doesn't fail as you're dipping it. And two, you don't want sharp edges of the ceramic shell that might break off during the pour and get into a bad spot. So yeah, you want this bronze to go through here as quickly as possible with the least amount of turbulence, and you don't want any sharp edges where the ceramic shell might break off during the pour process, because it's kind of a violent process. And so keep in mind that we'll be pouring molten bronze. It still weighs the same as bronze. It's still metal. It's still heavy, into what is basically a fired plate, a ceramic structure. So if my wax welds are not smooth and rounded, they'll be like little cavities, and the ceramic shell will go into those little cavities and then once the wax is burnt away, they'll just be little pockets of ceramics that'll be sticking out into the air, and it's real easy for them to break off. So be careful and get all your welds done correctly.
I'm taking some semi-melted wax from the wax pot, just kind of building these things up. Now that I got enough wax welded on here to stand it up, that's half the battle, really. And I'm going to come along and add all these screws. And I'm putting them sloped backwards because I want the bronze to go to the bottom first and then come like this. So all of these things will be sloped like going uphill. So when the bronze starts running down the shaft, it won't have a tendency to go into the mold. So the sticky wax makes it stay on there real quick, and then I go back and weld all the joints, and sometimes add more wax because they need to be strong, and the bronze needs to be able to flow through them easily. All right, so we're all sprued up. Pretty happy with this. I need to lay it face down on something soft and go ahead and finish welding all these little sprues because they're not welded very well. If I lay it face down, the gravity will help me fill up all of those little holes. Okay, I got all the welds smoothed out and wax added where I needed it, and this is basically ready for its first dip. I'm gonna wash the face with soap and water, kind of break that surface tension, and be ready to start dipping. Now I gotta finish welding the other one. We're gonna start the ceramic shell process, and I'm not gonna film every one. I'm gonna do the same thing over and over, probably 8 to 10 times. Dip it into solution, let it drip, and dip it into aggregate. First 2 coats will be fine aggregate, and the second, all the rest of them will be the coarser for strength.
I'm using a product called Suspended Slurry. That's this yellow product. It's kind of a generic do-all slurry. Its big advantage is it doesn't have to be mixed 24/7 like the commercial varieties. At the Big Boy Foundry, where they cast Debbie's bigger jobs, they have 4 different slurries that they use for different applications. So sure, they get a better job than guys like me that have to use the generic products, or I don't know, it's like using a combination blade on a table saw. You know, they got different blades for different purposes, but the combination blade will kind of help you get through. And that's what this slurry does. It just helps me get through. My shell room here where we're working is a 20-foot shipping container. I insulated the walls and the ceiling. I have an air conditioner and a dehumidifier and a bunch of fans. I'm trying to keep the humidity down so this stuff will set rapidly. And I have a heater in the winter because you can't allow it to freeze, but that's usually not a problem in South Louisiana. Pretty much an unlimited way to apply the stucco or the sand to the surface of the wax. I made these aerated little basins, and they work super. You could just lay the thing on the floor and like splash sand on it, or throw sand on it. There's lots of different ways. The problem is the wax is not very robust, and if you in the summertime it wants to deform, and in the wintertime it wants to shatter just by looking at it. So you got to be careful. So the aeratization allows me to get this done without putting a lot of stress on the wax.
So I've done 6 dips so far, and then I'm adding these little wire clips. They'll embed in the next few layers of ceramic shell. That's to make sure that this thing doesn't open up like this, because there's a lot of pressure when you pour in the molten bronze trying to open it up. Now this is a little better than most of Debbie's reliefs because it has holes that go all the way through it, and that kind of locks both faces of the ceramic shell together, so that's a good thing. But I went ahead and added the wire clips. I'm gonna go get the other one and do it. This is one dip after installing the wire clips, and you can see how they're embedding themselves. This was dip number 7, I believe. I'm gonna go 3 more dips and call it good. So probably 2 today and 1 tomorrow. I believe this is gonna be my last dip. This is number 9. It's getting really heavy. I'm kind of worried about the cup pulling loose from the rest of the mold.
So you can see why I had to cut this relief in half. Even half is just, I'm just barely having enough room to get it in the ceramics, the slurry and the sandbox, and my ability to hold it up with my arms. Things are getting heavy.
The dipping process is over. Just need to let it dry today or this morning, and then we need to get the wax out of the middle of this mold and then fire it.
Wax expands and contracts a lot with temperature, so when you go to heat these molds up to melt the wax out, there's a pretty good chance the wax can crack the molds if you're not careful. One way I try to reduce this risk is by removing this big huge chunk of wax that forms the sprue cup, the pour cup. Remove it ahead of time, and that gives some of the molten wax a place to go without expanding. And the big major sprue and the other sprues, they're hollow on the inside, and that allows the wax to expand and move into that hollow spot and hopefully minimize cracking. I get cracking now and then, but for the most part it hasn't been a problem for me. So here I'm heating up the shell just on the end where the cup is, so I can get the cup out before I put the piece into the hot kiln to melt out the rest of the wax.
Okay, so I got them both in the oven, and the pour cup broke on one of them, which is kind of a medium disaster, not a total disaster. And I don't know why, but couldn't stop. Go ahead and get all the wax out of it and fire them, and then I'll have to, hopefully I can patch it back on there. It doesn't affect the sculpture, but it makes a funnel for me to pour the bronze in, and I don't think I can pour the bronze without it. So knock on wood, see what happens. So the temperature got up to 700 degrees, and it's pretty much quit dripping. So I turned off the fire, closed the bottom door. When it cools down a little bit, I'll pull the molds out, and I'll install some insulation boards so that my steel grate doesn't warp. Put the molds back in and bring the temperature up to about 1600 degrees to vitrify the shell and remove any trace of any carbon products from the burnt wax. Okay, so I had it up to 1500 degrees for about 40 minutes. That ought to be good. I got it turned off now, and it's cooling down. So it's the next day. The molds are cooled down, they burn out, and you can see the cup that broke off, and it cracked when I was melting the wax. I saw the crack, and that happens pretty regularly, but then it fell all the way off. It's kind of thin. So theoretically I could pour just like this if I could get the bronze to go down the hole there, but practically speaking, I'm gonna put this back together with some more ceramic shell and dip it 3 or 4 times, and maybe put some wire around it and dip it again. So I've mixed up some 5-minute epoxy and patty caked a little bitty piece of this ceramic fiber insulation, and I put a little patch right here, and I put a patch on the other side. And this is only to keep it steady while I do a couple of dips and get some ceramic shell on it. So give it a few minutes to set up. We'll go dip this a few more times. Upside down this time, or right side up, whichever way you want to look at it. Gave the glue a few minutes to dry, and I just dipped the bottom half into the ceramic shell. And now I'm just going to, I'm not going to dip it in here with the aerator because I don't know how strong it is. I'll just sift some sand on it. It doesn't matter if I get sand inside the cup because I'm going to rinse this thing out. But yeah, I think we'll have a successful patch job here. Okay, we're 2 dips into the repair and it's looking great. It's actually kind of hard to tell which one broke because I'm dipping both of them because the cup was kind of damp. Probably do, it's morning, I'll do one this morning and do one more this afternoon. We'll call it good. I'll have to refire it to vitrify this and then we'll be ready to pour. So on the cup repairs, or repair, I did 4 dips. So that's 8 layers because the ceramic shell actually went on the inside in addition to going to the outside. So I called it good. Yesterday I did it like a quick fire. I didn't totally get them vitrified. And you can tell the dirty part at the bottom is the part that hasn't really been fired well. But I wanted it fired enough so I could rinse these out with water to get whatever sand might have gone on the inside. So I did that. They're lightly fired, they're rinsed. I put them in the sand pit to make sure everything would fit before they got hot. So we are ready to bring these up to temperature and pour the bronze in them. So it's time to pour, but that's a whole bunch of other activities. So next week's videos. Thanks for watching.